are talking about the found footage movie Curse of Aurore. Now, this movie is top and tailed by a YouTuber that is apparently quite famous. I've not actually heard of him before, but I've had a look. He does have over 1 million subs, so he's out there, and he does like paranormal investigations and such. And in the kind of context of this story, he receives this package which has a few kind of artifacts in there and a USB drive which he plugged into a computer, and it contains this found footage movie ultimately. And the movie focuses on 3 American filmmakers as they are traveling to Canada to research a script essentially, and they basically just discover that there's this legend about this particular young girl who was brutally murdered, I think in the early 1900s, and ultimately decide that's going to be the subject of their next film. But they seem to be not particularly welcomed by the locals. They start seeing weird stuff, and there seems to be a presence that kind of makes itself known to these 3 filmmakers. What'll happen? You'll have to watch the movie to find out. So let's discuss first of all what works. Okay, so first thing is obviously being a found footage movie, that is going to be a taste issue one way or the other, and this movie is not going to change your mind into kind of liking found footage movies. I actually didn't like found footage movies for a long time. Then I saw Grave Encounters and actually kind of got quite into it. This movie won't do that for anyone who's not a big fan of found footage movies. It is a low budget movie. But there are a couple of things that I can say I think are on the kind of the positive side here. I think some of the kind of the location shooting here, and I believe this is actually based on a kind of a real case, so to speak, in the fact that the subject of this movie, this Aurore girl, was actually someone who was murdered, I believe. So it kind of has, it's kind of like things like that are based on the Bell Witch hauntings, for example. They're fictionalized based movies on a apparent truer case, things like this. Anyway, so, but the setting, I think, it lends for some spooky kind of scenes. I think for a found footage movie, it's actually quite well shot. Maybe a little bit too well shot, we'll come on to that. And I think this snowy Canadian wilderness is quite creepy at times. There's instances where, for example, where they're on this long road and there's just snowy cornfields either side of them, and it kind of looks quite kind of spooky and creepy at times. And some of the kind of, like, they go into like a real graveyard and stuff like that. And I have to say that some of the kind of the location shooting and the way the set's been kind of made, it looks quite good. The effects are very, very low budget, and there are times where I think the filmmakers know their limitations and keep the effects to a quite a subtle, minimal use. So there are a couple of instances where you really just see flashes of things, and you know, if you were to kind of pick at it too much, yeah, it does look CG, but nonetheless, I think just in the kind of a small corner of a frame for a split second, I think you can get away with it for the most part in those kind of instances. I think the movie ends on the actual kind of story proper itself. The movie ends on quite a dramatic note, and I have to say that was probably the biggest shot of the film. And I think, you know, plus it was something that was foreshadowed, and I thought that it ended on a reasonable note in the actual film itself. I also have to say I think the framing device with this kind of YouTuber who legitimately does kind of like, you know, look at cursed objects and stuff was a clever idea, and I think it beats the kind of the trend of having things like Kududa in it, which seems to be the trend for a lot of these low budget movies. What doesn't work, I have to be honest with you, I think our 3 protagonists are very unlikable people. They seem, particularly the one guy who keeps stealing things, you know, I don't know how we're really meant to root for these people. They don't seem like likeable people. There is they seem very just selfish and out. They seem like typical Americans in another country. I know it's in Canada, but it's just like those films where you see like Americans just come in and be abrasive, be disrespectful to the kind of the local culture, things like this. And it's just a trope that we've seen a good many times, you know, and it's hard to root for these people. We don't get huge amount of kind of character building, but we also do, on the other hand, we get long periods of time of just people kind of like chatting and kind of stuff like that, and there's plot lines like a unrequited love that is mentioned but doesn't go anywhere and things like this. Part of the kind of, I think when you use found footage, you have to have a conceit where there is an excuse for filming. Now, it can be slightly exaggerated, you know, in things like, for example, I've mentioned Grave Encounters. There's a, you know, they're making, in that particular film, they're making a documentary, so it's understandable why they would have the cameras there in the first place. But in this movie, there is absolutely no reason for it. They're there writing a script. There's no reason to be filming everything. And there's instances here where it just doesn't make sense to the max. For example, where we have threatening things happen, let's just say, you have to imagine that there's someone holding a camera and they would be looking at the threat. Now, what they wouldn't do is then turn the camera to try and capture it. They would just be, you know, freaked out, and probably just the camera would be dropped or at least pointed to the floor, things like this. But the camera acts more like a pair of eyes here, if that makes sense. Like the character's eyes, what they would be looking at, and that's just not how, you know, someone holding a camera would act in these situations. In addition, there's scenes here where I just think you wouldn't be filming. There's a scene where they break down in a kind of, you know, a desolate road, and they walk to this kind of local person's house and ask for help. But there's one guy filming them, and I think if you've broken down and you're asking a stranger for help, what you don't do is walk into their house with a camcorder filming them and stuff like that. I have to say as well that the kind of the quality of the camera, the picture looks very high quality, but it almost looks like it's too good of a camera that would be just like a camcorder, things like this. And I also feel the need to put in like the fake distortions and things like that. And that's, for example, when the battery runs down, the camera kind of fritzes and things like that. And that's just not how cameras work. It will just turn off. There are a couple of, there's one instance really where we see the most overt use of computer generated graphics, and it looks really, I have to say, quite fake, very fake in a found footage movies are always somewhat grounded. The way that sort of subgenre or kind of style of filmmaking works, it lends itself to a kind of a more gritty kind of style filmmaking. And when you have things like, I don't want to spoil the thing that's towards the end, but there's something that happens to one of the kind of the members of this crew, and it's obviously very CGI looking, and it just really looks out of place, to be honest. And then there are, like I've said, there are instances where they use subtle effects that you can get away with that, but this one instance, it's kind of a longer take, and it looks kind of bad, to be brutally honest with you. So overall, this isn't a bad movie necessarily. I think if you're just a big fan of found footage movies, it's okay. You know, it's not bad. The story itself isn't too bad. There are some good, at least, you know, interesting shots. The characters, though, are so unlikable. I wouldn't say they're necessarily badly acted, but they're just unlikable, you know. And there's one, for example, scene where it has this false drama. They're like laying in the middle of the road, and there's like a car coming towards them, and they're just like, and one of them, like this, they're on drugs, so one of them falls asleep, and he nearly gets run over. And just think, well, this is your own fault. You know, you've done this. You potentially caused an accident with some innocent person driving along the road, and this is meant to be a scene where it's meant to be tension, and it just isn't, because it's like you're just acting like a bunch of dicks. So unlikable characters, you don't really ever kind of root for them, and I think you've got to be very clever at writing to make a character very unlikable and still have it an intriguingly, but that's not what happens here. I don't think it's bad, it's just very, very mundane. I'll give it a 5 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.